Next, I'll put the piston rings on. Okay, this here is an oil support rail. This particular piston, you'll notice that the pin goes into the oil ring. Well, this little void here, you need to support the oil ring somehow. So what they do is they simply make that land larger and add a hardened support rail. Now this has a little dimple in there. This will prevent it from rotating, and this little dimple needs to go face down in this little open area. And again, this is another one that's, boy, it's really a pain if you've never done it before. Gotta kind of be aggressive with this thing. Okay, you'll notice the little dimple is in that open area. That's where it needs to be. Now I'll just use this tool, make sure that that's seated. Put my oil expander opposite the gap. Now my gap for the expander is right in the center of the skirt. I'll put, the gaps are not important where they are as long as they're not near the expander. So the bottom rail you can put on that side, and the top rail you'll put on this side. But again, it really doesn't matter where they are. Okay, that feels good. Your second ring, is essentially an oil scraper. It has nothing to do with compression. I've already file fit these to the cylinder bores so that they fit properly. But the second ring, you'll notice there's usually a dot or some sort of a marking to designate the top of the ring. The second rings are a little more brittle than the top, so you kind of have to be careful. Forget those little tools that expand it. You'll break the ring. Just be gentle with it and get it on there. Make sure that it rotates free. If you don't deburr these edges when you're file fitting, you can feel it drag as you're rotating this around, so that's something you want to just check. The other thing you want to just pay attention to is make sure that the radial thickness of the ring matches the ring grooves in the piston. There is some differences in certain types of pistons and certain types of rings. You want to make sure that this ring is below the ring land always. Top ring, same deal. You got an identifying mark. That's it. Ready to put in the bore. The gaps, you know, some guys say you need to stagger them or whatever. The rings will rotate naturally while the motor is running. It doesn't matter if they're both lined up or not lined up. It doesn't, just doesn't matter. Let's start by installing our number one piston over here. Use a little oil on the rod bearings. Little Mally lube on the rod bolts so that we can torque them properly. You want to keep these you want to bring those down evenly because there's hollow dowels in each side, and you don't want to get it cocked. Let's put in the adjacent number 2. Then we'll look at our side clearance, which is a very important piece of the puzzle. But side clearance is rod side clearance is one of those things where, you don't check clearance after the fact. You design it into the build. Same goes for main bearing clearance. If you want 3/1000 main bearing clearance or 3/1000 rod bearing clearance, you design that into the build. You don't check it as you're putting it together after you've already ground the crankshaft. I have enough experience where I know if I want 4/1000 clearance or 5/1000 clearance or 2/1000 clearance or whatever that clearance may be, I pretty much already know that when I torque a rod with a bearing, I already know what the dimension will be. I've done this way too many times. So when I grind the crankshaft, I grind it to the dimension that I know will give me the right clearance. Again, putting this motor together and checking the clearances, it's too late. You've already ground the crank, All you need is a little bit of oil on the skirts. You don't want any lubricant on the piston rings, nor do you want it in the cylinder walls. That's what I clean the cylinders with. A little light coat of transmission fluid will be fine, but do not dunk them in oil. Do not dunk the rings in oil. Do not lubricate them. Just clean them, put them on dry. A little bit of oil on the skirts. I always give it one last check to make sure I didn't mess up installing the rings. It's too easy to get distracted. Double check. Again, Molly under the head, all the friction points. Oil on the bearing, good to go. Now they're ready for torque. Okay. These particular bolts will be torqued to 65 foot-pounds. Done, move on to the next.